It has been 1 month since the Orlando Magic season ended. It's time to look back at the lessons we've learned and look ahead to what's to come. We'll talk with Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel next on Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is June 6th, 2024. It will be June 7th, 2024. My name is Philip Rossman. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can find me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we're going to chat with Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel, get a recap of what he saw in his first season on the beat with the Orlando Sentinel, what we saw from the Orlando Magic, the lessons we learned from the Magic's playoff run, and where the Magic go next. We're going to get to all that coming up here in just a moment. But first, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's a great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. Just search for Locked On and the team you're looking for, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. And now, without any further ado, let's get into it with Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel. This was recorded before Game 1 of the NBA Finals, in case anything should happen. It probably didn't. But we'll talk about the NBA Finals on Monday's episode. For now, let's recap the season with Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel. And we are now joined by the Orlando Sentinel's Jason Beede to talk more about the Orlando Magic, what we learned this season, and what's going to come. Jason, it's been a month since the season ended. I haven't seen you in a while. It's a little weird. How have you been, man?
Yeah, I went to like a PR fun event last week, and Daniel Stein was there, and Kristen Lago was there, and it was like, a couple of the Wagner brothers were there, and Cole Anthony, and they were doing something with Planet Fitness, and it was kind of like, it felt so long, but also so recent, and the last month has just been kind of decompressing. Like it was like nonstop. I mean, it really was nonstop from the beginning of training camp all the way up until Game 7. I mean, I said the only day I took off was when the Sentinel Guild went on strike. I mean, every single day from the end of September to a few days after Game 7, obviously with post work, there was a story written almost every single day. So the work was nonstop, but it was a lot of fun, and been able to take this time. I didn't get to go to Clearwater or go on any fun vacations. I have been able to decompress a little bit, reflect a little bit, and relax and just take some time off, and it's been nice, honestly.
Yeah. I feel you there. I've definitely been doing the same. I was listening to some music the other day, and Bob Marley came on the shuffle, and I was just immediately sad. We never got Arnie Kander's review of the Bob Marley movie. I think that is the greatest unanswered question of the Orlando Magic season. Not the injuries, not anything else. What did Arnie Kander think of the Bob Marley movie? I think that is still what the people want to know. Hopefully we'll be able to track him down and get his full review now that it's available on digital. But Jason, we've had that month to decompress now. We've had that month to kind of absorb everything that happened in the season. Obviously we're in the NBA Finals right now, so the countdown to the offseason and to everything else is on. But what was, maybe this is too broad of a question to start with, but what was your big takeaway from what the Magic gained from this season?
I think it just continues to show that, Paolo Banchero is a superstar on the rise. Obviously I watched from afar. I didn't watch every single game of his rookie season, and I rewatched a lot of it after I learned I was, joining this beat and whatnot. But seeing him up close and the work he does and how he lifted this team, so many different moments. You can go back to that Denver game. You go back to the sick game winner in Detroit. Like literally he was sick. And then, of course, in the playoffs and just his performances, I think that to me is the biggest thing. I think the growth of Jamal Mosley as a head coach, you talk about the different injuries he dealt with and the rotations at times. And, so maybe there's a few big things. I don't think it's just one big thing, but the biggest thing, if I had to say, was just, obviously the Magic knew they had something special in Paolo, but we really saw it on display this year that, there was a reason he got picked as an all-star. He got a few all-NBA votes. And it's just like more and more confidence in that pick that this is the guy that they wanted, and he is the guy for this team and this franchise. And, of course, obviously we learned so much about a ton of different things about this organization, this franchise. But I think my biggest takeaway is just the continued growth of Paolo and Jamal Mosley as a head coach. It was impressive to see. And just the load that Paolo carried was just, it's hard to remind yourself that he's such a young age, only in his second year. And I'm excited to see what he can do in year 3.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's obviously like the big thing. I mean, it's the NBA, it's a star driven league. You kind of see how important stars are, and especially in the playoffs, like, we obviously watched him all throughout the season, but did you see, I thought we'd see him step up in the playoffs, but did you see him stepping up to this level? And how much more confidence does how he performed in the playoffs, in addition to what he did in the regular season, how much does that change the outlook for this team and what feels possible?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, you see fans on social media kind of like joke about, who he reminds everyone of, right? It's LeBron James, just the way he plays and whatnot, and just literally how he plays. Obviously, I don't think he had as much hype coming out of the draft and whatnot as LeBron did, but you look at the characteristics of him and how he performs and his ability, not everyone is ready for that moment. And I just felt like from the moment, after the first practice, when they took a couple of days off from the regular season, and he said he felt really good, better than he would have anticipated if he had told them that he would have played 80 out of 82 games. That just shows like he's a pro's pro. He takes care of his body, unless he's a little sick after the All-Star break. But for the most part, he takes care of his body. He holds himself to a high standard. And when he's not playing well, he admits it. I mean, he was frustrated with himself when there was that period where, towards the later part of the season, that he wasn't scoring enough points in his perspective. He wasn't taking over. And then even during the Cleveland series, I spoke to him. I can't remember what in between. I know we were in Cleveland. I asked him what needs to change, and he said he needs to take more control and speed things up on offense. So he's so beyond his years in the way he thinks about basketball. Like, people talk about basketball IQ all the time. It's impressive, to think the way he thinks, the way he talks. I mean, he's aware of a lot of things, from a big picture to a small picture. And that just reminds me even more of LeBron, let alone the way you watch Paolo and the way he shoots. And obviously people like to bring up Carmelo as well, but it was really impressive. Some of the shots he was making on the road in these atmospheres. I mean, I've been to big sporting events, obviously before the Magic Beede, I covered UCF athletics for multiple years between 24/7 and the Sentinel. I've seen really impressive individual performances. Mackenzie Milton in the Peach Bowl, Aubrey Dawkins against Duke and Taco and whatnot. But for me to see that firsthand in the playoffs, it was like, wow, this guy's different. And we knew that he was different, but to see it in the playoffs at that level, that stage with that crowd and how rowdy it was in Cleveland, it was really impressive. And I think it's an encouraging sign that, again, like, there's levels to this, and he's on the way up.
Yeah, it definitely felt like, I think this is kind of the next point to get to, but like, it always felt like this season was about getting introduced to the playoffs. It didn't necessarily matter how well the Magic played in the playoffs. It's just like, let's get that taste. Let's understand what it takes to get here, and then what this is like. And, games 1 and 2 are obviously a big struggle, but after games 3 and 4, when the Magic really kind of settled in, it was just like, okay, this team has that feeling now. And Paolo, the really only bad game he played in the playoffs was game 4. But like game 5, 6, and 7, like he showed up and made like really big plays. And I think gained a lot of respect. The way you gain respect in this league among your peers is you show up in the playoffs and you play well. And obviously Donovan Mitchell had to do something historic to keep the Cavs alive in game 6 and 7 there. I think it really felt like this whole season was, again, just about getting to the playoffs and getting that taste of it. Should we have expected more of this team, or what do you feel like the playoffs did for this franchise now as they begin to look ahead to what comes next?
Yeah, I think to answer that first question, maybe we should have. I don't know. I mean, you asked Markelle Fultz at Media Day way back in October. He tells you we're going to the Eastern Conference Finals. Okay, well, the Magic were only 5 wins away, right? If they get to the second round, I don't know what would have happened against Boston. They're obviously a really talented squad and whatnot.
There's a 5 seed in the finals right now. Like it's
right. Who knows?
It's not that impossible.
The fact that they got to game 7 and they were right there, if they get to the second round, they're not far from the conference finals. So, obviously every player is going to say they want to compete for championships. And I think some of the Magic players were, maybe a little bit more out of hand than they needed to be, but they all understood the task at hand. I think from an outsider's perspective, joining this beat and whatnot, understanding the past and where they have been under Jamal Mosley, I think right where they fell into it was where they needed to be, where the expectations were. It's what I expected. I think obviously you can look at it and go, man, those last couple of weeks of the regular season were tough to watch. I mean, if they hadn't beaten Milwaukee in that final regular season game, maybe our perspective of the season would be different. But at the same time, decisions aren't made off of one game. Decisions aren't made off of a week of basketball. I think the Magic lost their last 6 or 7 road games of the season between the playoffs and the regular season. So that's a little bit concerning, but I don't think anyone's concerned big picture wise about Paolo, about Franz and the growth of Jalen and everything that goes with that. So I think just to get into the playoffs, just to experience this. Now, obviously I didn't say they needed to go through this heartbreaking game 7 loss to learn the hard way, but they needed to go through this and I think, you're talking to Joe Ingles, talking to Gary Harris, like this is just a part of their careers and they're going to look back on this maybe next year, even maybe 3-4 years down the line. And I think Paolo especially and Franz especially, that game 7 performance, they're going to say, hey, remember when we were in Cleveland and this happened, X, Y, and Z. So I think the expectations for me were get into the playoffs, experience this, and boy did they. I mean, they put up a fight and they almost won the series, of course. How it impacts the future, I think, Wendell Carter put it perfectly. Like they still need to act like they're not a playoff team next year, and prove that they are a playoff team and they've earned this spot. Because I think a lot of people around the league didn't. You look at that. There was so much rhetoric online from fans outside of Cleveland and Orlando that this series, wasn't all that, but it was one of the best first round series, obviously.
Only first round series that went 7 games.
Right.
Man.
So I think when you're building off of this into the future, your expectations should be reaching the playoffs from here on out. I mean, it's hard to do. I think Rick Carlisle said it at one of the games in Indiana. There's different steps to a team's success. It's getting to the playoffs and then it's winning in the playoffs, and that's what they have to do next. But the expectations for this team were get into the playoffs and experience it.
Let's take a quick break to talk a little bit about our friends from PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members. It's the most fun and exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. All you have to do is just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. With the finals are the best part of the NBA season, and they mean more on PrizePicks. So do the star players. You get boosted payouts on selected basketball stars that you won't find anywhere else, all there to help you win more. When the finals are over, the hoops action doesn't stop there on PrizePicks. Women's basketball is getting going with young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside greats like Breanna Stewart and Aja Wilson, plus my girl Nafisa Collier. You could win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. PrizePicks is my favorite fantasy game to play. It is still available in Florida in a very limited fashion. You do have to compete against other people here in Florida, but PrizePicks offers you great odds to win. Plus, it's just fun. Picking more or less is so much fun. It's my daily fantasy game of choice. I play it maybe once or twice a week. Gives me that fix that I want as I'm watching the games throughout the sports world. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. We want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. For your next listen, be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Day 24/7 streaming channel. You can find that on YouTube or the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day brings you the biggest stories without all the screaming, just the best analysis in sports for all the big sports stories from local experts who know their team best. Get the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Yeah, and we'll definitely get into how the Magic move forward. But, you obviously mentioned kind of I want to make sure that we talk about two other players that are really important to this team and players that will play a big factor in this team's future. You mentioned the Game 7. There's no getting around it. Both Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner both really struggled in that Game 7. And obviously you don't want one game to base decisions off of, especially with a 21-year-old, a 22-year-old, like two guys that are super, super young in their first playoffs, as well as Paolo played. It's still everyone's first playoffs, so there's going to get better. But let's start with Franz. What do you make of Franz Wagner's season? Because, you look at the numbers and he did a lot. He had a career season by like every metric
but three,
except right? He couldn't shoot. What do you make of what we saw from Franz Wagner this year and how he projects moving forward?
Yeah, I think the problem with the three issue that he had, whatever it was, whether it was the lift he wasn't getting from his ankle that he messed up in the FIBA Cup and then dealt with again in the season, like, or whatever it was. At one point he had a wrap around his elbow. Whatever you want to chalk it up to, I think the problem with that is when you have a team that doesn't shoot well from three and you need threes, just something. You don't need to go above average. If the Magic had shot average, I think, we've written about this before. When they were shooting just the league average, they were, they had a bunch of wins. And if they shot even below average, like 36% or something like that, they were a successful team. So when you have a guy like that missing over and over and over again, let alone the playoffs, but in the regular season, it's more magnified, I guess. So people see the threes and they see it felt like to me a lot of the times his shots were short, right? They were hitting the front of the rim or whatever it might be. And they see that and it's disappointing. Obviously you have high expectations for your star players, but I think when you put it into perspective of everything else that he did and how he grew and whatnot, I still think it was a successful season for Franz Wagner. And he's going to carry that Game 7 with him more than anyone else on the roster. Obviously, I was surprised that he was up at the podium after that game. That says a lot about his character and who he is. And, I joked about that event I went to last week and he was there, he was much better spirits.
Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah. He was tanned and looked like he had gotten on a beach and he was in much better spirits. So, it was still an impressive season for Franz. And I think that, you talk so much about Paolo and Franz and their body types and that they're the future of the NBA and these lengthy guys who can defend multiple positions and do a ton of different things. Franz at the end of last year said that he wanted to improve his rebounding. Well, he did. And he improved quite a bit on his rebounding and just everything else besides the 3-pointers. I think the problem is people see the threes and it's magnified on a team when you don't have that 3-point shooting and you need just a little bit of it and he doesn't have success there. It's a problem, obviously. But it's still so much to say about Franz and who he is as a person. And it's obvious that it matters to him a lot.
I want to reserve off-season stuff for our next segment, but obviously it's extension time for Franz Wagner. We kind of know what the new reality is going to be here in the NBA for a little while with the cap increasing. There's no sense that the Magic are going to let Franz walk in any capacity, even if he hits restricted free agency. He's staying in Orlando, but is he, in your mind, a max player? Is that does this season, does he need to prove something this season to maybe hit that mark, or do the Magic, should the Magic be wavering at all at the idea that he is the number 2 guy on this team?
No, I think he's a max player. I think you don't want to overthink these things, because then that leads to frustration in the locker room or frustration among individuals, whatever it might be. I think it's clear to me, at least, that he's the number 2 guy on this roster. You talk about Game 7 with Franz. Go look at Game 6 with Franz. I mean, he's just so important to this organization, to this team. Obviously the attention is on Paolo and then being a first-time All-Star. I expect Franz Wagner to be an All-Star next year. I mean, that should be the goal for him, and the expectations are high for him. Obviously, the last thing we have of him is that Game 7 performance, which was disappointing. And again, like we said before, you don't make decisions, let alone that expensive of a decision, off of one game. Does it have an impact? Yes, a lot of things have an impact. We don't know to what extent the ankle is bothering him and what. I'm not going to make excuses, but there's a lot of contributing factors, and you have to look at these things from a big picture when you're making these types of decisions. But to me, at the end of the day, bottom line, he's worthy of a max extension. That's just, to me, how I view it.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much in that boat too. I think, on top of that, just you take care of your guys. It sends a message to the league that we take care of our guys. That makes you more attractive in free agency, which we'll get to here in a moment. But I want to kind of end recapping the previous season with this question: how important was Jalen Suggs to this team? Like how big was his growth this season to getting the Magic where they are?
Yeah, it was impressive. You almost sort of like forgot that young players can improve. Like, I think, Jeff Weltman talked about it at exit interviews, talking about the need for threes. That's one area that, you talk about player development, that Jalen grew so much in, and he hit some big threes in the playoffs and throughout the course of the regular season. So that alone is really impressive. My dog is sorry. The other thing with Jalen is, like, obviously you're watching a lot of NBA on TV and whatnot, and you're seeing these defenders and these physical plays. Like, man, he's playing football. He's playing football out there. I mean, it sounds cliche, but he is really physical of a defender. I would not want to be bringing the ball up the court and having to deal with Jalen Suggs all up in your face, and then Jamal Mosley shouting 3 feet to your left as well. Like, that's a pretty intense spot to be put in. But it was just so impressive to see Jalen grow. One of the first experiences I had when I joined the beat was with Jalen. Actually, I got to write a story when he was over in Africa last summer with the kids basketball camp, growing the game and whatnot. I talked with him over the phone about it, and just to see how far he's grown, not just in the game of basketball, but spiritually and mentally, and his confidence and where that's at now. To maybe where it wasn't before. I think he said at some point in the season, 21% from three was pretty lonely. So just to see how far he's come from, not just last year, but from his rookie year. And I think the big thing is that he was able to remain mostly healthy. I mean, obviously that wrist that he dealt with was probably more serious than it had to be. And he's tough, and he played through quite a bit. I still can't believe
the knee injury in game 2.
Yeah, that was when we saw him warming up at halftime of that game. I've had to triple check my eyeballs before I tweeted that he was warming up again. I mean, it was really impressive.
I mean, I joke with people all the time, like, Jalen Suggs is held together with like Scotch tape and super glue. Like, I forget which Magic Twitter personality tweeted this out, and this is not an offense to Jonathan Isaac or anything, but it's just like, Jonathan Isaac has a hangnail. He's out for a month. Got to protect him. Jalen Suggs' hand is like holding on by a tendon. Throw him back out there. He's good to go. Like, that's not a knock on Jonathan Isaac. That is just Jalen Suggs will play through anything because he is a tough dude. But how, we're going to talk a lot about the offense here in our last segment as we start looking ahead to the future. Because obviously, Orlando finished 24th in the league in offensive rating. They were the worst team by offensive rating that made the postseason this year. So obviously defense was a huge part of this team. How important was Suggs to establishing that identity, and how important is maintaining and growing that identity as kind of the foundation as the Magic, try now to advance to the second round of the playoffs?
Yeah, I think, you can ask players, what type of leader are you? And they say, I'm vocal, or whatever. There's all these different types of leadership abilities and how to be a leader. I think Jalen set the tone with his type of play. Like, you see this guy, going after these other players with the ball handlers, whatever it is, and just hunting and going after them and really setting the tone. And I think when you see guys like Jalen, regardless of the team, but especially with the Magic, lay their body on the line time and time again, diving for loose balls, just all up in the face of ball handlers and just really aggressive. I think that inspires a lot of other guys to put in that same type of effort or try and pull from that. And I think Jalen did such a good job of, obviously there were moments where he maybe was a little bit too physical and got into foul trouble and whatnot, but you talk about defending without fouling. That was something that I think he did a mostly good job at. But I just think he really set the standard for the rest of the team, and guys feed off that energy. Like, there were so many plays where, he would intercept a ball or poke it away and go the other direction. And there was such a difference. He made such a difference, when obviously sometimes he would go a little too fast. But when he would attack downhill and get to the rim when they needed something, like you talk about his defense, but turning the defense into offense was something that he did really well at. And I just think he sets the tone for that organization defensively. He was all defensive for a reason. You don't get that on accident, right? As a first-time voter, that was really hard to vote for. So it's clear around the league that he's that guy for them defensively. And I think, he's just so physical and aggressive, and I wouldn't want to play against him.
And obviously defense is where this team starts, but we're in the offseason now. It's going to be a busy offseason for the Magic. I think we all anticipate that. You've got that taste of the playoffs. You've got expectation now for the first time. I described this year a little bit as kind of a free season. Like, no matter what happened with the Magic, as long as they improved from the previous year, it was all going to be good. Yes, be disappointed with a Game 7 loss, but obviously the bigger picture, things look very, very up for Orlando. But now you're in it. Now your winning window is open. We know how much cap room the Magic have. We know the flexibility that they've created for themselves. How important is it for the Magic to add that right piece, or how important is it for the Magic to utilize this space now, considering we know that big contract with Franz is coming? Suggs is also due an extension. He'll get a big contract. Paolo's a year later. How important is this summer to setting that table for the Magic and what they're going to look like in their winning window here for the next 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, it really can say a lot about the front office. I mean, there's so much to be said about Jeff Weltman and him deciding to stick with this current team, as we saw the trade deadline. But I think what he does, and obviously it's not just him doing it, but like what the organization does with free agency and whatnot, I think will say a lot about where they see their big plan, their 4 or 5 year plan. I think it's funny you say we know how much cap space they have. I have to give credit to the story you wrote the other day about how much cap space they can have or can't have. Obviously, I think we all expect Mo Wagner to get his team club picked up, or his club option picked up, and I would imagine Joe Ingles does as well. We don't know that for a fact, but that would be, I think you would agree, surprising if they didn't. But there are a lot of different moves that come into play. There are a couple guaranteed contracts. You talk about Caleb Houston, and I know Jonathan Isaac's date is until January, but They can create more cap space if they want. They can have as much as, that $50 million range or somewhere in the 30s. I would say realistically, it's in that 35.
Closer to 30, yeah.
Yeah, that seems more realistic. But yeah, this is absolutely a crucial summer, just to show that, you're not just happy with what you did. In the moment you were, this is great. They experienced the playoffs and whatnot, but now we want to win the playoffs. Now we want to advance to the playoffs. That's what you're saying, I would imagine, if you're the Magic. And to do that, I think you and I have agreed over the course of the season, it became clear that, no disrespect to Wendell Carter Jr., but I think they do need an upgraded center at some point. So we've agreed that, maybe they have some questions at center, but the more obvious one is a guard of some point, a point guard of some type. Whether that's a scorer, whether that's setting the table. I think Paolo was pretty clear in his interview with the Washington Post what he wants. He doesn't want to be a point guard. They need someone like that to really help set the stage for this offense, because Markelle Fultz was great to work with and he was a lot of fun, but obviously they need a healthier version of him or an upgraded version of him to be able to run this offense and not get so clunky, where if the first option on offense doesn't work, it's just superhero time. So that's, I think, getting that point guard of some type, whatever it's going to be, that should be the priority for this team for sure. Because you have guys like Franz and Paolo and Wendell and of course Jalen as well. We saw bits and pieces of Jalen running at point guard, but I still think you need someone to help with that and help orchestrate the offense, because that would just open things up and divert some attention away without, getting rid of Paolo and Franz doing a bunch of the scoring for this offense. So, down the line, center can be addressed, but right now they need a point guard badly.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that, yes, there are all these kind of things that are kind of working concurrently. Like, the biggest need obviously is Markelle Fultz and Gary Harris probably gone, probably not coming back. Certainly Gary Harris's spot in the starting lineup feels like it needs to be filled. He had a poor playoff performance. He became kind of the fan scapegoat. I think a lot of it was unfair to the extent that it went, but he obviously didn't perform in the playoffs, and he's a veteran. You expect him to perform in the playoffs. So that spot feels, it feels like at minimum the Magic have to find a starter. But I don't know if we need to go into like specific names, because who knows where the Magic are actually going. As we talked with Keith Smith about free agency last week. We can't be naive. Probably by, it's still early June, but by the time free agency rolls around, the Magic probably know who they're actually going to be talking with and who they have a chance with. Like, the tampering happens. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. We'll get some clues, I think, to what the Magic ultimately do based on what they do with those options for Ingles and Mo Wagner. Our friend Keith Smith from Spot Track suggested the Magic might actually decline the team option on Mo Wagner, free up that $8 million, and then use the room exception to sign him to a new deal. So I think we all expect Mo Wagner to be back. It just, we make it a roundabout way. There's cap mechanics they can use to get there. So just don't be surprised by that if that happens. But as the Magic look to add new players, what's the balance that they have to have, or do they need to consider the balance of A, the great chemistry within the group, but B, also making sure that they're not taking away too much from the defense? Because, obviously we're all focused on getting more shooting. I know Jeff Weltman said that line during exit interviews that they were 14th in the league in 3-point percentage since January 1st, a little bit more than half the season. That's not insignificant. But we all saw what happened in the playoffs too. You can't ignore that. The Cavs are happy to let the Magic shoot from three. This is a low volume 3-point shooting team, which is, I actually think, a bigger problem than the percentage, honestly. You could probably get away shooting the percentage the Magic shot if you're a higher volume 3-point shooting team, but because they shot so few, the misses felt bigger. Like you said earlier. How do the Magic balance maintaining what they built and what they have while adding, obviously, at least one, maybe two really big pieces to this puzzle?
Yeah, I think that last point you just made is interesting because, you talk about cap space and how much they can create or how much they have. We both agree it's probably in that $30 million range, 32, 35, whatever it is. That's not just on one player. Like, they could use that in a number of different ways. And as you said, with the Mo Wagner club option, and look, the Magic have a lot of flexibility. We know that. And I think balancing also the culture is really important. That's something that's so crucial for what Jamal Mosley has done the last 3 years. And I said the last 3 years, but the first 2 years in his past season, of course. That's invaluable. You can't really teach that. You can't practice culture, right? Like, you can practice chemistry and practice plays and fitting into where they need to be on the court. But if there's problems in the locker room, like, the rest of that stuff doesn't matter. So that's something else. I think, you talk about all these different guards and who's really two ways and who can help defend. That's obviously important. I mean, I joked with Jamal after one of these pregame press conferences. I think it was maybe even the TNT game when Dennis Scott was working, or one of the playoff games. I think they were talking to each other, or it was one of those games. And I joked with whoever it was that, if you're not playing defense, you're not playing with Jamal Mosley. So let's be clear about that. They need to find someone who can not just defend and stand over on that side of the court, but actually defend at a high level. And with that, obviously there's not, you're not going to find someone who's on the Jalen Suggs level of defense, but at the same time, you need to be realistic about it. And you can't put yourself in a position where you're playing 4-on-5. So there's a lot of things that you have to figure out and weigh. And I think personality is a big thing, and being able to, you talked earlier about watching Jalen Suggs and the way he defends and being inspired by that to match that energy, to match that effort, without messing up a good thing. I think it's clear that the current makeup of the roster can only go so far. Obviously, they did force a Game 7 and came real close to getting to the second round. But things need to change. And with that, tough decisions are going to be made, and players have to figure that out and whatnot. The front office has to figure that out. But there's just a lot to weigh, and figuring out who fits well, and not just on the basketball side, but like I talk about with the culture, like that's really important too.
You talked a little bit about this. You obviously don't want to put too much weight in a 7-game sample size, because that's a really small sample. It's against one specific opponent. But how much should playoff performance and what works and doesn't work in the playoffs go into the decisions this team makes? There are some really good options out there that I think that a lot of Magic fans are considering, but players who have been inconsistent in the playoffs, or players that could be targeted in the playoffs, how much, and obviously the goal at the end of the day is to win a championship. Like that's what everyone's striving toward. How much does playoff performance and playoff impact play a role in who the Magic target? It's not just about numbers.
Yeah, no, I think it is important. Obviously, like, as you said, a 7-game sample against the same team where, you really understand what your opponent is doing each game. And obviously some adjustments are made, but not a whole lot. The biggest one we saw with the Magic was Jonathan Isaac going in and out of the starting lineup and whatnot. But realistically, the Cavaliers and the Magic figured each other out. They knew what their strengths were. They knew what their weaknesses were. So it's not like an 82-game regular season where you're in a bunch of different cities and playing against a bunch of different teams and whatnot. But with that said, winning at the end of the day is what decides things in this league. Like, if you're not going to be successful, if you're a coach, you're going to get fired, right? I mean, look what Cleveland decided to do. They moved on from a coach and they beat the Magic. That's at the end of the day, winning and success determines. That's kind of why you're playing this. I mean, obviously you love the game, you love the sport, and you love your teammates, you love the coaches, but at the end of the day, you have to be able to win games. And, I think it's tricky, right? Because on one hand, you don't want to say, we shouldn't give Franz a max extension because of Game 7. On the other hand, there are players that perform better in the playoffs, and, finding that type of player who can, step up in the postseason and whatnot. I think we were disappointed in what we saw from Gary Harris. That doesn't mean he didn't help the team or wasn't impactful. It's tough when you're not doing the one job you're supposed to do on the court, which is hit threes. So, finding guys that can lift players up in the playoffs is important. I think you look at what Drew Holiday's doing right now and how big he's been for Boston and some of his big plays on defense. Like he seems like that almost that missing piece, right? So there are guys like that step up and the right time and make big plays in the playoffs, and that's what you need to try and find.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting summer. I think the Magic could go in a number of different directions. I like, usually you have a sense of like, okay, the Magic need to target this player. And it just feels like there's like 3 or 4 guys and that could work, but aren't perfect fits. And then of course there's trades that could still happen. And that could be, it's going to be a very, very busy off season, and we'll obviously be following it all here and with you as well. I want to close the show with this, though. You mentioned at the very beginning, kind of your first year on the beat and some of the differences and things you noticed with the NBA. But what was kind of your first year on the beat, even the whole NBA lifestyle being very new to you? Like, I feel like I've been in the NBA my entire life and my entire professional life for certain. And so the 82 game schedule just feels very natural and as intense as it is. But what was your biggest takeaway being around this team for the first time and being your first year on the beat with the Magic and in the NBA?
Yeah, it's a long season, but it's a rewarding season. I think we got to the All-Star break and there was 20 games left or whatever the number is, and it was like, wow, we still are growing. And then we got over the hump there, and we got to the playoffs like it was nothing. Like, I would say in like December, it kind of dragged on a little bit for me as someone who hadn't covered that long of a season coming from a college football beat, right? I mean, I did cover college basketball, but that even is different. But with football,
you play a full college basketball season by mid-December. Like that's when we expect the rookie wall to hit.
Yeah. And the rookie wall hit me. I mean, there was a point where it was exhausting, but it was rewarding, going from city to city, traveling as much as we did. I just had so much fun. The biggest thing I always talk about is the access, like the level of access. Like all colleges do things differently, but bottom line, there's pretty much no locker room access. So to be in an NBA locker room, to be around these guys, to see them be themselves, because I think most of this team is who they are on the podium, but at the same time, they're even more themselves in the locker room, comfortable sitting down and whatnot. I think you'd agree with that. So just to be around this group, I think it was just a great group of guys. I mean, I can tell so many different stories. I remember we were on the road in New York. I was in the locker room and there's just blaring music. I don't remember what song it was, but it was some, blaring rap music, and it was a good song. I couldn't tell you what it was. And Joe Ingles was asking, whose playlist is this? Whose playlist is this? And I turned to him. He looks at me and he goes, "That ain't your playlist." So there's just all these little moments, like that, where I can think of 100 different examples of, we poke fun at each other, and obviously we're not friends with them, but we're friendly with them and whatnot, and creating these relationships and developing those relationships and talking with them in tense moments. I can think of, after Jalen Suggs' knee injury, being in the locker room, with Josh Robbins, and I can't remember her name, but the NBA TV reporter, we're all hunched down on our knees, and here he is in the leg compression suit almost.
The sleeve, yeah.
Yeah, the leg compression sleeve that you think of. He has them on both legs, and he's just gone through this, we thought at the time, a major injury, but it was still painful regardless. And we're talking with him in the locker room on the ground and whatnot. And like you could feel the intensity of the moment and whatnot. So there's just so many different moments that I can think of that were just so much fun. It was just an incredible learning experience. I mean, not just from a journalism side, but from a lifestyle side. Like I thought the biggest thing I learned was just like, when you're hungry and you're on the road and you're from hotel to hotel, you gotta take care of your body. Like talk about mental health. Like that was a big test of my mental right there. So I grew so much in a number of different areas, but it was just a lot of fun. I mean, it really was just talking with, I of course, Joe Ingles is a jokester, and we know Mo and whatnot, but getting to know Franz and Paolo and Jonathan and Gary and everyone else in between, it's just a really mature group, and it's a great group of guys. And regardless of who comes back next year, who they add into the fold, we know the type of player and the type of person that the Magic want in the locker room. And that team was just really special. So to be a part of that, to be able to go to the playoffs, let alone a Game 7, my first year on the beat was just an incredible experience. I mean, it was just awesome. And I really, really enjoyed it. And just, I can't say enough about you and the rest of the beat, welcoming me in and helping me and giving me pointers, even all the way up until Game 7, learning so much about everything. So it was a great time.
Yeah. I mean, we're all learning. This was my first year traveling. So learning how to, book flights and just deal with travel issues. Like, I always tell people this, like, the difference between when I was a fan to when I was working with the team is I gained so much more respect for the, you don't think about this because we all play 2K and like kind of take everything for granted. You gain a lot of respect for what the players go through. The schedule is no joke. Like having to do a back-to-back and get in super late. Like, I felt it as a reporter, and I'm not a finely tuned athlete, but like I'd get back from a lot, I did the Miami trip.
I did 3 back-to-backs in different cities, back-to-back different cities. And I can't describe it. I mean, I've told people throughout the season, like, I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to travel when I was a kid. So I wasn't intimidated by an airport, and I traveled covering UCF and whatnot, but like back-to-backs, different cities. When we went to Chicago on the second night of the back-to-back after being in Brooklyn the night before, I turned to Dan Savage in the third quarter. I said, man, I'm exhausted and I'm not even playing basketball.
Yeah.
And then we did 2 more of those back-to-backs. I mean, going back-to-back from Miami to Oklahoma City, I know they're on, private planes and staying in 5-star hotels, but that was grueling. But at the end of the day, it is the NBA. It is extremely rewarding and it's so much fun. And every game is so much fun. Like, even though I talk about the length of the season, Game 60 was just as much fun as opening night. And Game 7, of course, was something I'll ever forget. So it was just a great year and a great team to be around.
Yeah, and it definitely helped that this year was one of the truly special seasons in Magic history. I don't want to undersell that. Like, this is a team that I think we will talk about in the same breath as the Heart and Hustle team, as just one of the most beloved and fun teams to be around. It was such a great group. Honestly, like, I asked the question earlier, like, my biggest concern next year is like, they're not going to be able to bottle this up. Like, this isn't an elixir that you can pass around and say, okay, this is how it is. It's even if you brought the same group back, it's the problem of more that Pat Riley talks about. It's really tough to replicate how special this group was. And you hope that the Magic can get close because they built a culture that fosters this kind of camaraderie and this kind of spirit. But, Mo Wagner said it throughout the course of the year, like, this year wasn't just about this year. It was about 3 years of working together. And like, even Paolo said, I obviously Paolo said, I missed that first year, but like, we've been building this for 2 years. And like, there was just an incredible sense of ownership over what this team did. And if they can maintain, and honestly, like, if they can maintain that, that's going to help them grow and develop to where they want to go. Because, we can all be serious about this. Next year, the goal is to get out of the first round. I don't think anyone's job is in jeopardy if they don't. They'll be in jeopardy if they miss the playoffs, but no one's job is in jeopardy if they don't make it out of the first round. But the goal next year is to be better than Game 7, to get past that Game 7 hurdle. Like, that's the bar that's been set. And you obviously want to set that bar high. And that's a good thing for this franchise. It's something that frankly hasn't happened with this franchise in a decade plus, since Dwight was last year. So it's an exciting, as Jeff Woolman likes to say, it's an exciting time to be a Magic fan.
Exciting time.
Very exciting times. Jason, where can everyone, if they don't know where they can find you, they should, but where can everyone find you if they want to follow your coverage of the Magic as we get ready for this busy offseason?
Yeah, if you're watching on video, at The Real Beede on Twitter, right there below me, or X, I don't know, I still call it Twitter, but at The Real Beede on X, and of course, OrlandoSentinel.com. You can find all my work. Just I don't know when this is going to go online, but we're close. We're approaching the draft, approaching the offseason, approaching summer league. But I'm already ready for next season. I really am. So OrlandoSentinel.com and at The Real Beede on Twitter. Absolutely.
Yeah, the early Olympics I think is actually going to hurt. It's going to help Franz. Like everyone's been asking me, like, oh, I don't want Franz playing in the Olympics. He needs some rest. I was like, no, guys, don't worry. He's going to have a month before the season starts after the Olympics. As long as there's no catastrophic injuries, he'll be fine. But the early Olympics, the late FIBA World Cups, the late FIBA competitions help us with content through August and September because it gets awfully lonely there. Jason. It's been awesome having you on the beat. Looking forward to obviously the draft, free agency, all that stuff you mentioned next season as well. Thanks for coming on, and we'll have you on again soon.
Enjoy your layover at LAX.
Thank you. I want to thank Jason Beede for joining us on the show this month since the NBA season ended. Get us ready for the offseason. Talk a little bit about what we learned this season from the Orlando Magic. Hope you enjoyed the conversation too. But that's going to do it for us today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find us on Twitter you can find me on Twitter at @PhilipR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey. All of them makes no podcast to your podcast-enabled listening device. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can find us there on Twitter at @OMagicDaily. And be sure also to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub. You can find that at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub for my player evaluations and even more Magic content. Check that out again at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub. And as always, thank you for your support. Like I said, our next episode of Locked On Magic, we will go into what's going on in the NBA Finals. We'll have Game 1 and Game 2 to break down what lessons we can learn and other news around the league. We'll get to that on our next episode of Locked On Magic. Next week, we will also do player evaluation for Franz Wagner, what to make of his season, another free agent discussion, more draft discussion, so much more coming up next week as we get deeper and deeper into the finals. We're going to touch all that next week. But for now, have a great weekend. Be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Day 24/7 streaming channel for all the latest around the sports world. The best analysis from the local experts who know their team best. You can find that on YouTube TV or Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Check it out today, Locked On Sports Today. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. For Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Wright. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.